For American-backed rebels of the Free Syrian Army, the forces of President Bashar al-Assad are only half of the threat they face. The other half comes from their nominal allies among Sunni Islamists. As Nour explains in her fascinating page 1 story today, a growing band of fanatical al-Qaeda rebels are trying to turn the struggle into a holy war, attacking the local Shiite population and all too often turning their guns on the more secular rebels. She joins us now from Istanbul. Nour, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Michael.
I must say, you don't paint a pretty picture for anyone hoping for a smooth transition to democracy in Syria. So what can the rebels and their allies, such as the United States, do to neutralize these extremists?
The situation in parts of northern and eastern Syria has quickly tumbled out of control, especially when it comes to the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian Opposition Coalition, which are two Western-backed bodies. The question you ask is actually the question that we're hearing loudly in any concerted sort of way for the first time come from rebels and they're posing it to their backers in the West, saying, you've pledged to help us fight the regime, but we're facing another problem now, and it's these extremists. And for the first time, we're also seeing that they're sort of using the rise of al-Qaeda-linked militants to step back and separate themselves from these elements, which they see is scaring the West off from giving them more help.
I mean, could the war, I mean, you have a person there talking about it as a three-front war, which is a fascinating concept, but could it in fact be such that allies end up arming the secular rebels to take their fight against the Islamists, and what might that do for Assad?
Well, we're certainly not at that stage yet. What we're seeing is the beginnings of a very organic local backlash against al-Qaeda-linked militants who really, when they first started emerging on the Syrian battlefield in early 2012, we were welcomed, first of all, because their numbers were fewer, there weren't as many foreign fighters, and many were Syrian jihadists who had experience fighting against coalition forces in Iraq and then just, took their fight back home, joining the rebel insurgency against the regime. At that time, they were very effective battlefield players. They were doing a great job with social services. They weren't disrupting people's lives, and that has quickly changed over the past 6 months. We haven't seen a organized, concerted counterinsurgency effort yet, but this is what rebels say they're planning to do, and they are most definitely turning to the West for help with that now.
The very phrase, though, counterinsurgency, when it applies to who are ultimately insurgents fighting insurgents, makes it an interesting development. The lead to your story, lays out some of the concerns in a very poignant way. This description of the phrase, I think it was expunging the filth that some of these Islamists were using about their crackdowns against Shiites and the others. Give us a little bit of a rundown of some of the things that have been done that are really, getting people nervous in terms of the behavior of these people.
So one of the patterns we've started seeing in the north is that the group called Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, which is essentially Al-Qaeda in Iraq having reinvented itself in Syria. They're taking very strategic military decisions. For example, when Free Syrian Army rebels leave a town to a front line, they basically occupy that place and start offering services. So in that way, they're spreading their roots. They're also encroaching very close to the Turkish border, which must be a great concern for Turkish authorities. They're actively trying to take some of the major border crossings there that have been in the hands of Free Syrian Army or Western-friendly rebels for over a year now. We see they're starting to actively try to win over hearts and minds in this part of Syria. Over the Eid holiday a month or so ago, we saw them carrying out watermelon eating competitions, Quran reading competitions with children. We can't say that they've had any success so far, and in fact, the more you hear locals complain, the more they carry out these activities, the more you hear locals complain. But they're definitely spreading their influence in parts of the north.
And it would appear from some of your reporting that it's like the border regions in Turkey and elsewhere, some of it's starting to look a bit like the fear that people have about Talibanization, starting to grow their beards, starting to sort of try to fit in, not so much out of respect for these people, but because they are fearful of reprisals in the way that perhaps the Pakistanis have been of the Afghan Taliban.
That's been a pretty shocking and quick change in the border region. We've been reporting down there for 2.5 years now, and this is the first time that I hear Syrians themselves say, I don't want to go to that town. I don't want to pass through that town. There's an ISIS checkpoint there. We can't go. And yeah, you can tell it's a real concern when people start changing their lifestyle, the way they look, the way they behave, and the movements they can make. I think a major concern, and it's part of the story as well, is the fact that even the Western-backed Free Syrian Army has a movement problem in these areas because they're also threatened by ISIS. So, how do you expect a rebel army to operate if it doesn't have freedom of movement in the areas it's supposed to control?
All right, Nour, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, and congratulations on a great story.